I'm a rural land broker. I specialize in distressed properties, abandoned farmland, foreclosures that banks need off their books. I don't deal in rumors, I deal in acreage, soil quality, water access, legal disclosures. I don't believe in hauntings, I believe in paperwork. But there is one property I should never have taken: the Miller Farm. 3 months ago, the entire Miller family disappeared. Husband, wife, 16-year-old son. Police called it a voluntary departure. No forced entry, no blood, no signs of struggle. The official explanation was simple: they left. But people don't leave with dinner still on the table. I entered the house 3 days after they were reported missing. The front door was unlocked. The air inside was stale, but not rotten. The lights were still on. In the kitchen, there were 3 plates set out. 1 glass of water half full. A chair slightly pulled back, as if someone had just stood up. It didn't look abandoned. It looked paused. That's when I noticed the recorder. An old digital voice recorder sat near the sink. Small, cheap, red light blinking. Still recording. Next to it was a torn sheet of paper, written in thick black ink, the letters pressed so hard the page nearly ripped. Do not listen past 047. There is something about a warning like that. It doesn't stop you, it guarantees you'll do the opposite. I picked it up, pressed play. At first, it was just static, a faint hum, the soft scrape of wood against wood. Then a man's voice. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry. We were wrong. His voice wasn't panicked. It was resigned, like someone who already knew the outcome. We thought it was just something in the field, moving through the corn. A pause. We thought it was an animal. There's a sound in the background, metal against wood, slow, dragging. But it doesn't move like an animal. A second voice, a woman, quieter. I can hear it breathing. The man responds quickly. No, you don't hear anything. Silence. Not empty silence, contained silence, like the air itself was waiting. I watched the counter tick forward. 039, 040. The woman again, soft, almost pleading. It's closer tonight. 041, 042. The man's breathing grows heavier. We shouldn't have opened it. 043. There's a sharp metallic clank, like chain links shifting. 044. The woman whispers, Don't let it hear you. 045. 046. 047. There is a breath, not human. It's too steady, too deep, too controlled. It fills the microphone, a slow inhale, then an exhale that vibrates through the recording. And then a subtle shift in tone, like something trying to form a sound it doesn't quite understand. A distortion, a half-shaped imitation. The recorder falls. There's shouting, footsteps, a door slamming open, and then wind. But when I stood in that kitchen, there was no wind. Not outside, not inside. The curtains were still. The trees outside the window weren't moving. Nothing was. I stopped the playback. The red light kept blinking. It was still recording. I stared at the device for a long time, trying to convince myself it was a malfunction, a loop, corrupted audio. That's when I heard it. Not from the recorder, from beneath the floor. A faint metallic dragging sound, slow, measured, like something pulling weight across wood. It moved from one end of the kitchen to the other, and then it stopped, directly below where I was standing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The recording wasn't a warning about what happened. It was a warning about what was still there. I stepped outside the house just before sunset. The Miller property sits at the end of a dirt road bordered by thin woodland on one side and a cornfield that stretches farther than it should on the other. In daylight, it looks ordinary. Weathered wood siding, a collapsing fence, an old barn leaning slightly to the left. Nothing about it screams danger. That's what makes it worse. The cornfield stands directly behind the house, tall, dense, row after row in perfect alignment. I've sold farmland for over a decade. I know how corn moves in the wind. I know how it sounds. This field didn't move, not even slightly. There was no breeze, no rustling, no insects. It was the absence of sound that unsettled me. About 30 yards in, I noticed something wrong. A narrow strip where the corn had been pressed down, not storm damage, not random. It looked like a path. A path that started deep inside the field and ended directly behind the barn. The barn door was slightly open. I was certain it had been closed earlier. The wood creaked as I pushed it wider. The smell hit first. Wet earth, like soil that had just been disturbed. The interior was mostly empty. Old tools, broken crates, but in the center of the wooden floor there was a deep gouge. A long indentation dragged across the planks, rounded, heavy, as if something cylindrical had been pulled slowly across the floor. The mark led toward the back corner. That's where I saw it. A length of chain, thick, industrial, snapped at one end. The metal links were bent outward, not cut, bent. The Miller family did not own livestock. That was confirmed in the property records. So why was their chain bolted into the foundation? I knelt and examined the floor. There were scratches in the wood, parallel, close together, too narrow to be boots, too irregular to be tools. Not hoof marks. They looked like fingernail scratches, but longer, deeper. I stood up slowly. The chain wasn't broken from something pulling away. It was broken from something pulling toward it. I turned toward the cornfield. The door stood open behind me. The field remained completely still. No wind, and yet, about halfway down the flattened path, one section shifted, just slightly. Then stillness again. I didn't see a shape. I saw displacement, a subtle parting of corn. Behind the barn, the soil looked disturbed, darker, looser, as if something had been dug up and put back. The earth wasn't settled naturally. It had been replaced. I walked toward it. Halfway there, I heard it again. A faint metallic vibration. Not from the barn, from beneath the ground. Slow, muted. The sound stopped. The field stayed still. I looked down at the disturbed earth. There was a single imprint in the dirt. Not a boot print, not a hoof. Elongated, deep, as if whatever made it had been standing there for a long time, facing the house. I didn't dig, not that day. The truth is, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what had been chained inside that barn. As I walked back toward the house, I felt something I couldn't explain. Not watched, measured. When I reached the kitchen door, I glanced once more at the field. Still no wind, but the path through the corn was wider now, and I was certain it hadn't been that wide before. I drove to the nearest neighbor before dark. His name was Harold. He lived about a mile from the Miller farm, tucked behind a line of trees like he wanted the land to forget him. When he opened the door, he didn't ask who I was. He looked past me, over my shoulder, toward the direction of the corn. Then he said, "You went in there." I didn't answer. Inside his house, the air smelled like old coffee and dust. He didn't offer me a seat. I told him I was handling the property for the bank. I told him I needed to understand what happened. Harold stared at the floor for a long time. Then he said, "They didn't leave." Certain. Flat. He said the Millers had been normal people, quiet, hard-working. 3 weeks before they vanished, they started digging behind the barn. Not shallow, deep, for 2 days. And at night, the barn lights stayed on until morning. I asked what they were digging for. Harold shook his head. They didn't know. He repeated it slower. They didn't know what they were digging for until they hit it. The first strange sound came the night after they stopped digging. A metallic dragging. Low, slow, like chain pulled across wood. He told himself it was wind, but the nights were still, and it always came after midnight. Then he told me about the boy. One night, Harold saw him standing on the back porch, staring into the corn. No flashlight, no phone. Harold called out. The boy turned his head. Harold said the delay in that movement made his stomach drop, like the boy had to remember how to move. The boy stepped off the porch and walked into the corn. Straight in, no hesitation. The Millers found him nearly an hour later, lying between the rows, eyes open. He wouldn't speak until sunrise. When he did, he said one sentence. "It knows my name." Harold rubbed his hands together. "The night before they disappeared," he said, "they were arguing." "About what?" I asked. "Whether to lock it again." "Lock what?" Harold pointed toward the direction of the farm. "There's a door under that property," he said. "A metal door." He had never seen it, but on the final night, the barn light turned on around midnight. Then silence, heavy silence, and then the dragging sound returned, louder, closer, as if something heavy had been pulled up and moved across the barn floor. Harold said he grabbed his rifle. He didn't go outside. He watched from his window. He saw the Miller father running between the barn and the house, back and forth, like he couldn't decide where to be. Then Harold heard something else. Not the chain, a slow exhale. Deep, controlled, like something that had been breathing in the dark for a long time and finally let the air out. He said the window glass vibrated, just slightly. After that, the barn light went off. The house light stayed on. The next morning, the Millers were gone. I asked why he never called the police. He looked at me. "Who do you tell?" he said, "when nobody hears what you hear." When I returned to the Miller property, the sky was turning gray-blue. The cornfield stood perfectly still. No wind. Behind the barn, the disturbed soil looked fresher than the day before, as if someone had been there recently. I stood over the patch of earth. If there really was a door under that farm, whatever was inside it had been close enough to leave scratches on metal, and strong enough to bend chain. The Millers didn't disappear because they left. They disappeared because, at some point, the door stopped being locked. I should have left that evening. After speaking with Harold, after seeing the disturbed soil again, after realizing the chain had been pulled toward its bolt, I should have driven away. Instead, I stayed. I told myself it was professional obligation, documentation, due diligence. The truth is, I needed to know if the sound under the floor had been real. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, I heard something faint near the barn, a metallic shift, distant, easy to dismiss. But on the third night, everything changed. The air inside the house felt heavier than before, like the pressure before a storm. The power flickered just before midnight, once, twice, then steadied. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the recorder in front of me. I hadn't touched it since the first day. At 11:58 p.m., the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The house fell into darkness. Only the dim glow from outside filtered through the windows. The cornfield beyond the glass looked like a wall, solid, black. I listened. No wind, no insects, no distant highway noise, nothing. Then, a metallic drag. Not from the barn, from beneath the house. Slow, deliberate, like chain being pulled across wood. It moved from one end of the kitchen to the other, stopping directly below where I sat. I didn't move, because I remembered what Harold said. They were arguing about whether to lock it again. The recorder clicked, a soft, mechanical sound. I looked down. The red light was blinking. It was recording. I hadn't touched it. The screen illuminated in the dark. 0038. 0039. I froze. I hadn't pressed play. I hadn't pressed record, but the timer was running. 0040. The metallic sound resumed beneath the floor. Closer now, directly under my feet. 0041. The house creaked, not settling, shifting. 0042. I heard something else. A faint exhale. Not inside the recorder. Inside the room. 0043. I turned slowly toward the hallway. It was darker there. Thicker. Like the shadows weren't empty. 0044. The dragging stopped. 0045. The silence felt tight, pressurized. 0046. 0047. The recorder distorted. A breath filled the speaker. Deep, measured, exactly like the recording from the Millers. But this time, it wasn't coming from the past. It was coming from now. The kitchen door behind me shifted slightly, not opening, just enough to move the latch. A small metallic click. I didn't turn around, because I understood something in that moment. If I acknowledged it, if I reacted, it would know I was aware. The breath came again, closer, right behind my chair. The air grew colder along the back of my neck. Not wind, absence. The recorder vibrated against the table. Its screen glitched. The numbers reset. 0041. 0042. It was repeating. From beneath the floor, the dragging sound changed. It was no longer horizontal. It was vertical, slowly ascending, like something being pulled upward, toward the kitchen. I heard wood strain, a faint crack beneath the tiles. The pressure in the room shifted. And then, a soft knock. From directly under my feet. One knock. Then another. Measured. Patient. I don't know how long I sat there. I don't know how long it knocked. Because at some point, the knocking stopped. The dragging stopped. The breath stopped. The lights flickered back on. The kitchen looked normal. Still, empty. The recorder lay silent on the table, its screen dark. I stood slowly. Every part of me expected something to be standing behind me. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty. The back door was closed. The cornfield outside was still. Then I looked down, at the kitchen floor, near the base of the cabinets. There was a thin line in the tile, a hairline fracture. New. It hadn't been there before. And just beside it, resting on the floor, was a small metal shaving. Fresh. Curved. Like a fragment torn from a chain link. That's when I realized something worse than any sound. It hadn't been trying to get out. It had been testing the floor.
I left the Miller farm at sunrise. I didn't pack. I didn't lock the doors. I didn't look back. I told myself I was done with it. I reported what I could to the bank. Not the recording, not the chain, not the fracture in the floor. Just enough to delay the listing. They didn't care. They wanted it sold. 6 weeks later, they found a buyer. Late 20s, burned out, wanted a reset. He called it starting over. He said he wanted quiet. I met him once. One meeting, one handshake, one signature away from closing. The first thing he asked me wasn't about the roof or the well. He asked, "Does it get windy out there?" I looked past him to the cornfield. The sky was clear. The air was still. No wind. But far out between the rows, one narrow section leaned slightly, as if something had passed. I said, "Not much." I tried to warn him about the recording, about 047, about the sound under the floor. But every time I tried to speak, my throat tightened, like the words couldn't move. So I said nothing. I watched him sign. I watched myself sign. And I left. 3 nights later, my phone rang at 12:11 a.m. Unknown number. I answered. No greeting, just breathing. Slow, controlled. Then his voice. "I can hear it in the field." I didn't speak. He whispered, "Do you hear the metal?" I heard a faint dragging vibration through the call. Then silence. The line went dead. The next morning, the bank called. The buyer hadn't shown up. They sent someone to check the property. The house was lit, the kitchen light was on, the car was still in the garage. No blood, no forced entry. Just one thing on the counter. A voice recorder. Red light blinking. I asked the bank to remove me from the file. They reassigned it. Months passed. I almost believed I was clear. Then an automated email arrived. "Congratulations, the Miller Farm transaction has been completed." I hadn't processed any sale. I logged in, opened the file. Owner, updated. Buyer, confirmed. The buyer name was mine. First name, middle initial, last name. My date of birth, my address replaced with the Miller property line. I checked the signature page. My signature. Not close, not similar. Mine. But I had no memory of signing. I searched my calendar, my email, my calls. Nothing. Just a closed transaction. Just my name. In the back of a folder in my desk, I found a printed copy of the contract. Fresh ink, dated 3 days ago. The papers smelled like damp soil. Attached to the last page, a scrap of notebook paper, handwritten. Do not listen past 047. I didn't write those words, but the handwriting was mine. That night, from somewhere inside my building, very faint, I heard metal shift. A soft, dragging sound, like chain across wood. I looked at the contract again, at my name under buyer. The farm didn't need belief. It didn't need witnesses. It only needed a name and a signature. If you ever find a cheap farm at the end of a dirt road with corn that doesn't move when the air is still, read the paperwork twice. Because the only thing worse than signing it is realizing you signed it before.